Jasmine here, and I'm bringing you another eschatology video. And last video we concluded with this idea of the hyper focus on the self and pride, and really this extreme, intense desire to just love ourselves and have really self-centered nature being a strong symptom of what we would call this demonic energy. And we left off basically saying that technology is really a tool to help us overcome some of the limitations of our humanity. And so I just wanted to take a look at technology and some of the technologies that exist as they relate to end times in this second installment of our conspiracy theories mini-series. No man knows the day or the hour that the end is going to come, and so if we start locking in too strongly to a particular set of events, we could find ourselves kind of embarrassed because we could be very wrong. But in any case, let me read you a few passages and then we'll jump into the discussion. The first passage that I want to talk about is this idea in Revelation 11 of the two witnesses. So if you don't know much about the two witnesses, long story short, once Christians are out of the picture, they seem to be inflicting a whole lot of frustration on the rest of the people who live on this earth. And at one point in their journey, they are killed. And this is the prophecy. And this verse basically tells about what happens right after that happens. And so in chapter 11 of Revelation, verse 9, it says, "And representatives from the people, tribe, languages, and nations will view their bodies for 3.5 days and not permit their bodies to be put in a tomb. Those who live on the earth will gloat over them and celebrate and send gifts to one another because these two prophets brought judgment to those who live on the earth." Okay, so that's point number one. In Matthew 24, there is a laundry list of items that are presented as signs of the end from Jesus to his disciples. And they are clearly very confused about what the end will look like. They obviously think that it's going to happen in their lifetime, and it's been at least 2020 years since then, roughly, and so they were dead wrong. So again, I think that it's safe to say that it's not a good idea to start locking in timelines and things like that. But here's an indication that is listed amongst other things that the end is near. In verse 14, it says, "This good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the world as a testimony to all nations, then the end will come." So hang on to that idea, and then we're going to go to point number 3. The third and final point that I wanted to mention with regards to things that I think indicate some sort of technology is Revelation 13 and verses 15 through 17. And I think that this is probably the most well-known and widely accepted reference to some sort of technology with regards to end times. "He was permitted to give a spirit to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast could both speak and cause whoever would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. And he requires everyone, small, great, rich, poor, free, slave, to be given a mark on his right hand or his forehead, so that no one can buy or sell until he has the mark, the beast's name, or the number of his name. Here's wisdom. The one who has understanding must calculate. The number of the beast is the number of a man, and that is 666. A lot of different ideas about what this could be speaking about technologically. Is it talking about bioengineering for this beast, making him talk? Is he a clone? Are they talking about robots or whatever? Good ideas, maybe. Maybe we'll attempt to tackle that later, just for kicks and giggles. But at this point, the thing that I do want to address is the most probably realistic and understandable interpretation of this verse is that people will be given a mark on their right hand or forehead so that no one can buy or sell unless they have this mark. So, why did I list all 3 of those random passages that seem somewhat unrelated but yet somehow relate to end times? Because they all tie into this idea of technology that hasn't existed until very recently. For example, in that passage that talks about the two prophets and how the entire world will watch, have we ever been in a situation in previous points of history where everyone in the world could watch an event? I would say probably not. I've mentioned in some of my other videos that when these riots started happening right after the George Floyd incident, there's a large percentage of the population that relied very heavily on live streamers to be able to gather credible information. I was completely mind-boggled by the extreme amount of difference that was between the live coverage that was being aired on Facebook and YouTube through these really, really brave, amazing live streamers, and the mainstream media coverage that just had a handful of clips that was completely outdated and very biased and very incomplete with regards to what I was seeing. We are already starting to become somewhat desensitized to these really horrific events that are happening in real time, in real life. This doesn't really seem all that unrealistic to be something that could occur in today's world, whereas in previous generations, it wouldn't have even been a possibility. With regards to the whole world being able to hear the gospel, same thing. Now you have the Bible that is translated into so many different languages due to the great work of all our Bible translators. Shout out to like YouVersion and all those other guys who've been working hard getting the Bible translated into these maybe more obscure languages. You also have, more contemporary versions of the Bible. You've got your Dwell Bible app, you've got your Streetlights Bible app. So in audio formats for people who maybe are not as inclined to sit down and read a physical written copy of the gospel, the scripture in an audio-visual format, like the Bible Project, that are being released in these mainstream social media formats. YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, there's so much access to the gospel right now. And even if you just wanted plain old text of the Bible, now you can get it in so many different translations without anybody actually even having to translate it for you. You can use an auto translator app and it will automatically translate the text that you need into a language that you can understand. Finally, when we look at this last passage about the mark of the beast and being able to buy and sell, disregarding all of the other very interesting debate topics within that passage that I read, let's just hyper-focus on this idea of not being able to buy or sell unless you have this mark. And of course, there's been so many interpretations in more recent decades about what that could be. Is it a barcode? Is it a microchip? Is it a, some sort of implant? Whether it's an RFID scanner or whatever it is. Basically, having the ability to unify a currency and then track what is being taken and what is being left, behind. There hasn't ever been another generation that would be able to pull that off. Let's look at an example of the Amazon Go store. So the big problem that Amazon said that they ran into when they were launching their Go stores, which I'm super jealous. If anybody gets to go to that store, tell me how you like it, because it seems so cool. But anyway, the problem that they said they ran into was that people were in the store and they would take different things and there would be different people and they'd leave at various times and they would have to identify who took which item. That was the problem, is solving this idea of detection. So that seems to be a pervasive problem for folks who are in the AI developing world, is they're saying, hey, detection tends to be the biggest problem. If we want to be able to differentiate one person from another or one task from another, the system needs to be able to identify what that problem is. It would have to be refined enough to be able to say, okay, I'll provide you a chip or whatever thing is this mark of the beast. We have to be able to unify the currency, which is something that, while we haven't done it, we would totally be capable of doing it. There's digital currency and cryptocurrency that currently exists, and we can easily translate currencies across digital platforms when you use your Apple Pay or anything like that. So it's not an impossible concept. So you would have to have a unified currency, and you would have to be able to detect who's coming, who's going, who's taking what, to simplify the process, because I don't see this being a process where people are going to be maybe standing in the bread line like this is the Great Depression. I think that this is going to have to be a much more technologically advanced system, and we need the technologies that are currently being developed to be able to pull something like that off. This detection problem. what are some things that are currently in place that would be able to help expedite that process? So if you were to look at the application programming interfaces, which are APIs, that essentially are the connectors from an app to another data source or database, there are a few major key players. We tend to call them unicorn organizations, unicorn companies, that app developers tend to really want to get an API plugin for. And so while it's helpful for that app developer to maybe broaden the scope of who their target audience might be, it's also super helpful for these unicorn companies who are using this information as a data collection point. Let's just look at Facebook. Facebook has over 200,000 apps that use their application programming interface. All the data points that they get are being shared with Facebook. Let's look at the Prism program. It's an NSA program that has been hosting data sources from Yahoo, Microsoft, Google, YouTube, Skype, Apple, AOL, Facebook for years. And so, again, you've got a government organization that are collecting data from these organizations that have ties to everything in your life, who you're connected to, what you look like, who you follow, what you enjoy, the types of shows you watch, sort of things you buy, when and where you travel, how you travel, what languages you speak. What about transportation patterns? So if you look at a program like Uber's Open Movement platform, you've got these various metro planning organizations that are using these transportation demand models based off of data that's being collected from you voluntarily as Uber or Lyft or any other sort of rideshare rider, who is basically feeding into these models that allow the different planning organizations to know how long does it take to get from one point to another. How does that change with weather? How does it change when events occur? Just really interesting, actually pretty cool stuff, but it's data that's being provided that's allowing those detection issues to become less and less complicated. And there's at least 10,000 apps that are plugged into Uber's API, for example. So again, you've got all of these things that are interconnected that are just creating more and more data points to allow this to be a reality. For example, if you look at Amazon's web services, Amazon Web Service hosts so many different types of government organizations. It hosts defense organizations, intel organizations, local and federal government groups. It hosts NIH, which is the National Institute of Health. So never heard of Stuxnet. Stuxnet was a government-created virus that was installed in around 2007 to basically go in and destroy the Iranian nuclear centrifuges from the inside out. In 2010, the source code for the Stuxnet or virus was actually discovered, and the code became an open source playground for people. And many people have torn it apart. I believe Stanford University has done research studies on it. It's just really interesting, but the thing is that it goes back to my point, is that you cannot necessarily control who gets a hold of your technology once it is created and once it's out there. Now we're in a situation where we have to wear face coverings and masks when we're out in public as a result of this COVID pandemic. Well, luckily for anyone who's using facial recognition technology for anything, we have been using things like Snapchat's filters and Instagram's filters that put a little Santa Claus face on you, or bunny ears, or a little dog nose, and basically those have allowed us to create patterns of recognition for people without being able to see their whole face. Amazing, it's just crazy. And so again, that whole problem of detection is no longer really an issue when you look at those sorts of things that are already being introduced into our world. And so when we talk about cryptocurrency and digital currency and those sort of things that need to be in place to be able to buy and sell, how things come and go, again, like that technology that exists has actually been really helpful for other things too. Once upon a time, people used to join pools to help mine for Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency. I don't know what other kind of currency there is aside from Bitcoin, but there's probably something else out there. And people were mining this stuff together, pooling their computer power, and being able to harness all of that processing power and speed to be able to find these cryptocurrency coins. And now we see, for example, with the Scripps and IPM's new world community grid that they've put together, scientists are using artificial intelligence and the combined computing power of these people who are willing to participate in it in this open pandemic program that essentially mimics what the cryptocurrency mining process was. You just pool together your computing power so that we can help find a cure. And it's really interesting that that is a thing. And on a side note, just talking about AI in general, it's how many movies have we watched about robots and things like that taking over the world? And when we've got Elon Musk even saying that he's concerned about the extent to which AI can take on a life form of its own, which we saw with Facebook's chatbot program. Facebook had to shut down their chatbot program because the two systems that were supposed to be exchanging files between each other started creating their own language, and Facebook was not about that life, and so they said we need to shut this thing down before it gets to a point where we can't control it. You look at the DeepMind program for the AlphaGo game. That game had real life humans who were playing it and had been champions for years, and in a very, very short period of time, the artificial intelligence that was basically learning the game at the beginning beat all of the world champions individually and then combined, and then shut itself down, I think, as it was programmed to retire itself. But when you start looking at things, like I said, like Stuxnet, you've got these bad actors who may create some sort of process or some sort of AI that doesn't have any rules, that doesn't have any moral code to it. And so we currently live in a world that is getting closer and closer to being able to have a digital currency and sophisticated enough AI to be able to implement that currency to be able to allow people to buy and sell. And we clearly already have the technology in place to have the gospel translated to every language and have people across the world have access to it, and allow people to have access to live streams of horrific footage that we are certainly becoming desensitized to in today's day and age. And so how much closer to the end must we be if we can look back even a decade and say, there's no way you would have been able to fulfill this, 10 years ago. I don't have any particular calls to action for you guys today. Shock. I think the big thing about today's discussion is really just this idea that there's only a handful of really, really specific things that we could pinpoint and say, oh, I can totally conceptualize what would have to be available and be in place for this particular part of an end times prophecy to be able to be fulfilled. Simple. It's practical, it's realistic for our era, so why not talk about practical, realistic stuff? Real, relatable religion. That's what we're about. So anyway, hopefully you found that interesting. I certainly had a lot of fun doing my research and studies because I happen to be a tech nerd, so I thought that was really fun. And I guess we're gonna have to see where the discussion takes us next. Bye, guys.